Alright, we're going to get ready for the next speaker. We have Neil Baker. He's a wildlife research technician with the Division of Wildlife. He actually presented here a few months ago. We had a coyote presentation for the public, and I asked a coworker, like, what's his favorite subject to present about? So really like the coyote talk, and he said beetles. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a good EcoTalk. We haven't had one yet. So he will be presenting today about some research in general and life history about beetles. So let's welcome Neil.
Hello, I'm Neil Baker. I'm a wildlife research technician at the Hocking College Wildlife. I do not do any research on beetles. Unfortunately, my research is mostly wildlife, division wildlife related, so deer, quail, anything basically that you can shoot. I need to make sure that there's enough of them for our hunters to be happy about that. So that's my division wildlife, but also I get to do snake surveys, endangered species surveys, and stuff like that. So it ends up being pretty cool. But like Lisa said, I was asked to do a presentation on my favorite things, which is beetles and the inordinate fondness I have for them. So this guy right here, beetles are incredibly hard to identify, and we'll talk about that. Here we go. That guy is called a festive tiger beetle, and I know that because someone told me. What we'll cover today is what the Division of Wildlife is, because it's important for me as ambassador for the Division of Wildlife to let you guys all know what we can do. And then we'll just talk about beetles in general, their life history, we'll do some identification, talk about different species and families we have of them, and then we'll talk about the conservation efforts that go with them and what you can do to help out our beetle species, and then just have some more resources for more information. This is probably the coolest beetle I've ever taken a picture of, and almost all these pictures in this slideshow are mine. I'm a big, I call myself an amateur entomologist, so I take a lot of pictures of insects. So the Hocking Division of Wildlife, we manage wildlife by setting fishing, hunting, trapping, seasons, methods of harvest, and enforcing those laws. So my job is to make sure I survey so that there's enough animals out there. That data goes then to up top, then they determine, okay, what's the bag limit on deer then? Are there more deer, are there less deer? Do we have enough quail, or is there not as many? And then we set the bag limits for that, and then the wildlife officers will enforce those laws. So there's kind of three different parts that all work together. We own over 200,000 acres of wildlife areas, and cooperatively manage several hundred other acres. And then we're primarily funded through the sales of hunting and fishing, trapping license, anything you do that what we just basically call hook and bullet stuff. And what's great about working for the Division of Wildlife is that when someone's mad at me and they go, well, I pay your taxes, so I'm doing what you're doing. I'm like, actually, the Division of Wildlife is not paid by your taxes. I mean, it's paid by an excise tax on your fishing gear. But no, so we're actually a pretty independent entity, which makes it so that we can do a lot of good without going through a bunch of kind of red tape and stuff. We have wildlife managers on land that do what they basically want to do. And so that's really great, but of course we are here to serve the public, because the North American model for wildlife is that all of you own the wildlife, right? The public, we all own it together. So that means we have to have an entity, a governing body that's in charge of it, so that one person can't just go shoot all the passenger pigeons and now they're extinct, right? That way we can have enough for everyone. So we have around 400 state employees between wildlife biologists, technicians, law enforcement, and then education. So what is a beetle? This has haunted mankind for eons. Well, it's actually a pretty easy question to answer, because beetles have very specific adaptations to them, they have very specific physiology that makes them beetles. But what makes it challenging is that they are a very diverse group, and that's what we'll be talking about a lot. But just by this picture, look, the colors of these things and the shape. You got this guy here, red and black and white stripes, and then this tiger beetle, shiny iridescent green. This guy, bright orange, these weevils with their long proboscis. So there's a lot of diversity. So it's kind of hard to know what a beetle is. But first and foremost, a beetle is an insect. But what's an insect? Well, an insect comes from basically insections. because that's what an insect is. It has different body parts that are segmented in different sections. They're from hexapoda, which means 6 legs, and they have segmented bodies, jointed legs, exoskeletons. They do not have a vertebrae. They have their skeleton on the inside, and they're real gooey on the inside, and then the skeletons on the outside. The 3 main parts of the body, they have the head, and then you've got the thorax and the abdomen. So the head has the mouth parts and the eyeballs, all the creepy looking things that everybody loves. The thorax has those sets of legs that every insect has 3 pairs of legs and 2 pairs of wings. Now, to differentiate between different orders of insects, you can see the adaptations that the wings have. For example, we have this hanging thief robber fly. See how he has these wings. Well, flies really only have 2 wings, but they have 4. You just can't see the other ones because they've been basically adapted evolutionarily to not need them anymore. But they still have it. You can see here on this bee fly, just the 2 wings, right? Well, they've got these little nubs, basically, that are the other wings. A butterfly, look, 1, 2, 3, 4 wings, 6 legs, same thing with him, they're just folded over. So insects, that's basically what they are. They can fly, as opposed to our other arthropods that cannot. And there are a million species. There's estimated to be 5 and 10 million because we can't get into the Amazon and shake all the trees down to figure out, get these big bins to figure out what's technically all there. But there's a lot of insects. And just in Ohio, there's about 10,000 species, and there's only 7,000 species of frogs and 6,000 species of mammals overall, right? And just in Ohio, there's 10,000 insects. So that's what an insect is. They're everywhere, and some people like them, some people don't. These are not insects, okay? See these guys? Not insects. Spiders, crustaceans, ticks, centipedes. They're not insects because they don't have wings. The spider cannot fly. Spiders can glide by having their webs and then flying really high into the atmosphere, but they don't have wings. This is a little brown mud bug, and that was actually a study we were doing with on turtles that we actually were with a lab that was doing crawdad studies. So you get a crustacean, they're decapoda, that means 10 legs. That's not 6, so they're not insects, right? The spider here, with all his legs, 4 there, look at all those cute babies, right? That's adorable. Love that little spider. Isn't that great? And then, yeah, centipedes here too. Yeah, so it's almost Halloween, so I thought I'd show you guys all these horrifying creatures. But yeah, so these are not insects, right? So you can differentiate basically by those very specific details. But beetles, right? Beetles are a very specific kind of insect. This is also one of my favorites. I actually know what species this is. I don't know what those are. This is a snail eater. And see that mouth part? You actually stab that into snails and hunts them down. There's caterpillar hunters and all these things. This is actually a really iridescent purple. So a lot of these insects could just, all these beetles could just be black, right? A lot of them are just black on the ground. But they can also be a lot of really shiny iridescent colors. So what is a beetle then? So a beetle comes from the order Coleoptera. Coleoptera means koleos, which is Greek, more or less, for sheath, like the sheath of your sword or a knife, and ptera, which means wings. So that means that their wings, like I said, they have 2 pairs of them, right? Well, the top pair, you really only see because those are the sheaths. They're really hard, they're called elytra, and they're really hard, unlike maybe you saw those butterfly wings, which are all really soft and have those scales on them. They're very, very hard and protective of the wings underneath them. As you can see, I somehow managed to get this picture of a beetle like taking off. And when beetles take off, their first wings go up, and then their ones below them are folded. And if you watch the slow-mo, I recommend YouTubing it, because they will like unfold their wings and then fly off. Beetles aren't the greatest flyers because, again, those wings are folded all the time. They don't really actively use them. Most of them are crawling on the ground or on plant materials. But that's really what makes beetles special, and how you can identify them is by having those elytra. Their mouth parts are also different. If you think about a butterfly, you can think of its long proboscis, right, going into different honeysuckle plants and getting all the nectar out of them. And there's also like bugs, like aphids and stuff that may be pests that you think, well, those things stab, or like the lanternfly, they have a proboscis that stabs and drinks all the juices out of plants. Well, beetles, actually have mouths that are very, very similar to humans and mammals. They have a top and bottom mandible. Now they have side mandibles too to hold in what they're eating. But they more or less have chewing mouth parts that they use, like we had seen with this guy. You can distinctively see, he's got those two things, and then right in here, he's got actually a mandible that will chew in on those snails. They also have a metamorphosis that's very similar to a butterfly. They actually go through a cycle. I'll talk about that a little more. But they have egg to larva to pupa to adult. And then they are actually found everywhere. Beetles are found everywhere except for the ocean. So there's no marine beetles, but there are intertidal ones. When the waves come in and there's little pools of water around these rocky beaches and stuff, there's actually different species of beetles that live specifically in those pools of water. But they are not in the ocean, but they are terrestrial and they're everywhere. This is what they look like when they're young. They're like grubs, basically, was what you would call them. And then as adults, they're like that. And there are so many beetles. It is ridiculous how many beetles there are. Millions of species of insects, right? Like I had said, with 600,000 of those species of insects are beetles. And of those beetles, 50,000 of them are weevils, which is what we have here. These weevils are having a good time. This weevil is calling on me. This is called a billbug, which I saw in McGee Marsh. He was one of my favorite beetles I've ever seen. And this guy just has a ridiculously long proboscis, and he's adorable. But weevils, really interesting. They are also kind of pests. You think of like a boll weevil, kind of destroying crops and cotton and stuff. But these weevils themselves have more species of weevils than all the birds, the mammals, reptiles, and amphibians combined. Okay, that's how many of them are. And they're all tiny, different shapes and sizes. So do you think we actually know that there's 50,000 of them? No, there's probably tons more. Because like I said, you can't go around shaking every tree in the Amazon to really figure out how many there are. But they theorize about 1 in every 4 animal species in the world is a beetle, which is just incredible. Which leads me to the whole point of really this conversation, which is if God had created all living organisms on Earth, then they must have an inordinate fondness for beetles, which is what a man named J.B.S. Haldane. He was an evolutionary biologist in the early 20th century. He's a really cool guy. Actually, he's one of my heroes. He's kind of an anti-establishment scientist in a way, so he was really cool. But he was in a room full of these different speakers and theologists, and they had asked him, about what he thought about God, what he thought about nature. And he's like, well, the only thing I can think of really about God, if God exists, he must love beetles. Because there's more beetles, there's more different kinds of them all over the place. And they're really unique. And look, this is an Eastern Hercules beetle, and you can see how big this guy is. Next to that quarter, that's one of the biggest beetles we have here in Ohio. This is a 14-spotted ladybug, or lady beetle. And that's I don't know how I saw it. It's so tiny. And again, here I have a macro lens that gets a lot of these, and there's almost microscopic little beetles, where this guy is huge. So God was like, yeah, just let them have beetles. It'd be great. So with these beetles, there's probably like 20 or more, about 24 probably families of beetles. And they cover all kinds. So we have, like I talked about, the weevils. We have, this is called a two-eyed click beetle. So they're probably the Latteridae. This is a metallic wood-boring beetle. If you talk about like emerald ash borers, really shiny beetles, that's a similar one. Again, I don't know what that is, but it's beautiful. And there's these rove beetles are very easy to identify because their elytra here don't go all the way down their abdomen. And they're also really easy to find because if you're just gardening or you're just like really on the ground mostly, they're everywhere, just crawling around. They don't really fly much. So you can find, underneath a log, you can find all 4 of these different kind of families just in one little, inch by inch basically square. There's also carrion beetles and lady beetles, which we call ladybugs. They're also really important. We've got longhorn beetles, scarabs, which are pretty popular in pulp culture. So when we talk about beetles and insects, people just refer to a lot of these things as bugs, which I don't have a problem with because I'm not a stickler on semantics, really. But if we're getting scientific, they're not bugs, okay? Insects come in different orders, okay? They're separated. Beetles, like I said, Coleoptera, that's one order. Bugs, true bugs, are a whole separate order. It's their own thing. So if you see a beetle and you're like, look at that bug, I'd be like, that's not a beetle, that's actually a, right? Well, and people at school would be like, Neil, I know it's not a bug, it's fine. Like, but it's a true thing, right? And so you probably would be able to tell a difference between a beetle and an ant, and a beetle and a butterfly, right? A lot of these things are pretty different. But bugs are very, very similar. So you can actually very easily, when you just see one on a plant or anything, you can just see these elytra and this line that goes down the middle and this little scutellum and the pronotum, right? They can treat mouth parts, that line down the middle. A bug, if you think like a stink bug, right? They've got this egg, I'm sure you've all seen them in your house. Mm-hmm. They've got these X's that basically form where their wings kind of come out that way. They're not really shielded by a really hard material. They just kind of unfold and have it that way. They also have different ways of reproducing, or the ways of their metamorphosis. So they have holometabolism, which means that's like a butterfly, right? Starts as an egg, then it becomes pupa, then it becomes, or larva, then pupa, and then it becomes the adult. Where bugs are hemimetabolism, which means they basically start off as a very small version of themselves. Kind of like us, right? We start off as a little human, turn into a big human. We don't like all of a sudden get into a shell, turn into a bunch of goo, and then come out with wings and go fly off like some other animals. But that's what beetles do. Maybe one day, I don't know. But there you can see the difference. How this line down the middle, the antennae, and then this X across them. So here's another look at the complete versus incomplete metamorphosis. Like I said, the bugs would just gradually get bigger, turn into bugs. Now looks like a bed bug. And then the larvae here, as they get bigger, egg, larvae, pupa, adult. So this is basically like your chrysalis orchid. Here's your anatomy of an insect, of a beetle here. Yeah, there's a lot of parts, Jim. Okay? So they're really hard to identify. This is why I'm saying I don't really know what a lot of them are. I put them into a database and then online naturalists, and there's a community that we communicate, try to figure these things out. But you can see this is from my own guidebook I have, that it's a key, that you key them out by like how far apart the mesosternum is from the microcoxa and stuff, which in the end makes hard to identify. So when the word gets out that, you know, I'm in school and people are like, oh, you know beetles? What's this one? I'm like, I don't know. I'm sorry. But some you do. Some are really popular, or some are you can see all the time. And once you get knowing, there's some that have common names, you know, like a 12-spotted lady beetle or that 6-spotted tiger beetle. Beetles are also really, really cool because they're one of the insects that have like this huge diversity of antennae, which is really unique, which you might not think about is really interesting to look at an insect and look at their antennae. But they all serve different functions and stuff, and they kind of like have big eyelashes or big like bulbs at the end of them. And so that's another reason why beetles are also just different and diverse, because even if they look exactly the same, you have 5 that look almost exactly the same, they can all have different antennae with them too. So beetles versus other subjects. So a lightning bug or a firefly, right? What do you guys call it? Raise your hand if you call it a firefly. Raise your hand if you call it a lightning bug. Well, you guys are both wrong. It's neither, okay? I tell you. They're not bugs. I just went through that, right? Not bugs. They're also not flies, right? They don't have those little rudimentary wings like I talked about. What I like to call them, okay, they're beetles of the family Lampyridae, right? So, lamp beetle, okay? That's what they are. They look like lamps, and they're beetles, okay? They're not on fire, and they're not flies, okay? They're not lightning, and they're not bugs. But again, I'm not going to get into semantics. That's the more judge I have. To tell you kind of about how, you know, you call ladybugs, but they're beetles, and that's fine. But it does tell you that their insects themselves have all these diversities, and within the insects, the beetles have this huge diversity. Like, these are 2 different species of firefly, lamp beetle, that we have here in Ohio. That's a winter firefly, and I think that's just a Pennsylvania one. I think there's like a dozen species or so. And there are any fireflies out west too, so we're cool. So, one of the things I want to talk about specifically, not just in general about beetles, but is a project that I actually did get to work on, which is the federally endangered American burying beetle. Now, the American burying beetle is a carrion beetle that lives underground, so it eats a lot of dead things and stuff. And it was located basically in Dakotas, Nebraska, Oklahoma. Well, what happened was a lot of oil rigs and fracking got really, really big. So they tore up the earth. And these beetles have very, very complex mating rituals that take a really long time, and they have to meet each other and do all this stuff that just disrupting their habitat calls for massive die-offs. Ohio, the Columbus Zoo, Cincinnati Zoo, and the Division of Wildlife have worked together, as you can see here, to do a reintroduction program for these American burying beetles. So they rear them actually at the Cincinnati Zoo, and then they take them to the wilds down near Columbus or Zanesville and stuff. And this was me actually out there getting all hot and sweaty and dirty, trying to help reintroduce these beetles. So what you do is you get a big plot of land, and then you dig a bunch of holes, and then you get each specific beetle, and before you put the beetles in, you put a dead rat, and then you put it in the bottom of the hole, and then you take those two beetles, and it's like a secret date, basically. It's like a blind date, right? Where you're like, all right, guys, I got your rat for you, and then you put it in a room, it's like 10 seconds of heaven or whatever, and you're just like, all right, have at it. So then they have that complex mating ritual. They actually mate and eat, and their children will eat that rat in there. And so this has actually been a really successful program that they have reared, and actually I was proud to say that this one was one of the most successful ones that they've had as one of these beetles, and it was just a lot of fun. It was pouring down rain the whole time, but it was still a blast. And as you can see, these guys are actually pretty decent sized beetles. They'll fit like right in your hand, which is pretty cool. So yeah,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you bring any of this home?
No, that would be federally legal. And I think the Division of Wildlife would get that. So with all that, unfortunately, we are losing populations of insects all the time because of just human development and climate change and all these things. There's been studies, like windshield studies, particularly in Europe, where people have like literally just hit bugs driving along the highway, and then now there's almost no bugs that they're hitting. So there's anecdotal evidence, there's real evidence that suggests that our insects are losing spot. And I had mentioned the passenger pigeon earlier because that's a really good tool to use, because there were so many passenger pigeons that they filled the sky. They blocked it out, right? And they thought, oh, we'll never lose those many. Look at them, there's so many, and now they're extinct. And the same thing I think about insects all the time. I think about beetles. And yes, there's so many. How could a beetle be federally endangered like that one? Well, it's just like all this development and all the things that unfortunately humans have been doing. It's up to us to try to do our best to circumvent that and protect them. So it's fall, which means there's kind of these different things that you can help during the fall, which is leaving your leaves. Because they provide a lot of food, shelter, and nesting for beetles. I found this beetle in a pile of leaves, right? And if I would have raked up all my leaves and put them into a trash bag and put them into a landfill, that beetle would have died. It would have never lived to its life. It would have destroyed it, right? Also, leaves are good for your ground and the trees around them. There's a reason leaves drop it. It's a whole cycle, so just environmentally. But if you do want to have some clear space, just break them all into a certain section and put some brush down. And all of that will allow, again, to have some habitat. Leave the seeds. Don't mow down a bunch of like vestiges of different things you have, because those will still be used to lay eggs and stuff. And a lot of insects actually will overwinter as adults to the next year, and so they need a lot of this leaf litter to stay warm for the wintertime. Well, there's species like butterflies and stuff that are living there that you'll be able to find. Also, avoid chemicals like fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides with the best durability. Those definitely do not have adverse effects towards our insect populations. And then planting native plants. There's a study about like a ginkgo tree, where compared to a white oak tree, where the ginkgo tree was non-native and planted just in the streets, and it held like 2 or 3 species. The oak tree held like 150 species. So I was really interested in the previous presentation about how that would affect in the future and stuff, but it's still important to plant native plants. So native plants, as you can see here, have all the beetles on them. They love flowers. So just planting goldenrods, asters, milkweeds, black-eyed Susan, coneflowers. There's even specific species of beetles that only like certain plants. They have host species as well. There's a beetle called a swamp milkweed beetle. It only lives on swamp milkweed. So it's important to have a diversity of these plants so that you can have a diversity of these animals as well. Now, beetles as pests. Yes, beetles are destructive and they're pests. They do some major damage. The Japanese beetles, we all know, we see them all the time. They can take up orchards and eat them all around. Their grubs are really big, they'll eat roots. Weevils have been notorious agricultural pests. The boll weevil in the south has been really bad. Emerald ash borer destroyed all of our ash trees. Rootworms, called agricultural pests. The corn rootworm is a really bad one. The Colorado potato beetle, this is actually a false Colorado potato beetle, but Colorado potato beetles were a big issue out west, destroying potato populations and agriculture there. And then June beetles, because they just annoy people and get in your hair and you're like, ugh. So that could be pests too. But beetles as friends, beetles are really important. They, just like the caterpillars, are a really important part of the food chain. Their grubs are very similar to caterpillars, so they'll get eaten to start off that food chain. They are eating smaller things, so they could be hunters of smaller things, like that snail hunter I was talking about, or they can just eat vegetation and pollen and be the start of those food chains. So ladybugs, for example, they'll eat like aphids, pretty ferociously. Actually, they're really, really intense hunters, which you don't really think about, but if you're microscopic, the ladybug will be a very, very intimidating animal. And they just can eat all the aphids. So they're actually really beneficial to have in your garden because they will eat a lot of the bugs that would destroy your plants. The carrion beetles, like I said, will clean up the environment because we need carrion beetles to, clean all of which is covered in dead stuff all the time. We need scared beetles and leaf beetles for pollination of flowers. Lightning bugs are just really, really cool. And diving beetles can indicate water quality as well. And there's different insects, beetles that would do that as well that you can test on. If you have a lot of them, that shows your water's healthy. If you have very few of them, that shows you maybe your water needs to be cleaned up. So they're really important. And like the previous thing, they just have intrinsic value on themselves. They exist. So we don't need to know that they pollinate. We don't need to know that they do something for us. They aren't not serving us. They existed a long time ago, okay? They're just doing what they do. So it's important for us to know that our actions have consequences and that we can do good to help out these populations. So in summary, we discussed what a beetle was and why they're so special. There's so many of them in different Ohio, and if you just take a look around, you'll find some. It won't be very hard. Just turn over, even in the wintertime when you're just taking your trash out, lift it up, and there's probably dark green beetles and ground beetles everywhere. This is a brown and gold rose beetle that I just found next to like a dead carcass of a possum. This guy was crawling on me, and that's your swamp milkweed beetle right there. And here's some more literature. There's some resources that you can use. There's another picture of the splendid earth-boring beetle. So yeah, that's the Division Wildlife number, poaching number for Division Wildlife stuff. And yeah, thanks. Any questions?
Well, in history, the boll weevil destroyed a lot of crops.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was that cotton specifically?
Yeah.
What did they do to prevent that? And
They developed pesticides. I get it.
pesticide?
Yeah. There are some instances where there's a plant called a purple loosestrife that is a very invasive plant, particularly where I used to work up in McGee Marsh. And they actually had a species of beetle that really, really likes to eat purple loosestrife specifically. So they actually introduced that beetle to those populations, and now purple loosestrife really isn't a problem. So the beetles actually, even though like a boll weevil could be a problem for all of these things that you like, well, the beetle could actually be a solution to all the maybe the problem that you're having. But yeah, they developed pesticides. I don't think they did any like natural way of preventing that. Also, the development of different seeds and agricultural things, developing a hardier cotton that gets from it and stuff, and just trying to eradicate it for the most part. And just less cotton production over the years as well. More synthetic and stuff has a less reliance on cotton anyways. Yeah.
So the beetle that you were helping to preserve, that you were helping the Cincinnati Zoo and Columbus Zoo, I saw in the picture that it was native over in like the Nebraska area, and then there was also the one part of the picture where it's native, or that it showed population here in Ohio.
Mhm.
Was it originally native here in Ohio as well, or was it native, or wasn't in population here until you brought it over?
You know, that was the thing. They don't really know necessarily. They're pretty sure it was just in Oklahoma, really,
Okay.
and in northern Nebraska. But
Okay.
that map shows that those are, because that's the place where we're reintroducing them.
Okay.
And so that's just like the ecological
Where?
part. So they live there now.
Okay.
And so that's why that shows that. But based on my understanding, I'm pretty sure they're just native to Oklahoma. But this is really the only, pretty much the Cincinnati Zoo is the only one that really cared enough to do something about it, I guess. And those lands in the wild where you have this bunch of land
Mhm.
to be able to
Introduce them.
Now they, I think, are doing similar things in somewhere in New England, I think Connecticut or
Okay.
something. They're trying, like Western Massachusetts maybe even, but they're trying similar things. So it's a pretty young project as well. So just Ohio kind of getting the ball rolling on it. And the Division of Wildlife actually used to have a place near a place called Fernald down near kind of Hamilton County and stuff, where we actually had a population of them, but they weren't taking. We could never
Yeah.
find them. There wasn't enough staff, so it's all just at the wilds now.
Is there a possibility that those could become invasive, since they are not?
No, because the way invasive species work is by high proliferation.
Okay.
These beetles are not going to proliferate highly. It takes a long time. It's a very specific dance that they have to do, right? It's not just you pull up a honeysuckle and the seeds go everywhere, and the next year it's all honeysuckle.
Mhm.
That's why they're endangered, because it takes a long time for them to reproduce
Gotcha.
and to have a specific thing. They have to travel pretty far distances to meet each other. So, no, that's a good question and a good idea, dude, because like we're introducing it to a place that's not native, but it's a similar habitat, and like I said, it's not really going to be a problem. Even if it's non-native, it's not non-native invasive. Okay. Thank you.